Ricky and Carol Hendon. We are missionaries in Utimagos, Peru, and just want to share our testimony of how that all got started. Um, how far back should I go? When Carol and I grew up in the same church, um, I guess you were what, maybe 7, 8 years old when
Yeah.
she started stalking me. And
No, I was not. I was too young to stalk.
we grew up in the same church, and we'd changed churches several times when we were kids. And we got married in 1988 and began to ask God to give us something to do. Because as a teenager, giving my life to Christ, there was no discipleship, there was no call, and kind of fell away. Went back to doing what I was doing before. And so we, as a couple, we started praying, God, give us a call, give us a purpose, and felt God called us to work with children and youth, and didn't know what that looked like. I had no prior training, no children's pastor, no youth pastor. So we would just gather all the kids up and teach them the Word of God, and do Wednesday night services and sing, and they'd quote scripture. We did that for a while, and wound up leaving that church and looking for a home church. We'd visited around a lot of different churches, and wound up in the Assembly of God church in the town pretty close to where we lived. And we'd been married for what, several years at that time?
About 3 years.
3 years, and really never heard about missions. Didn't know anything about missions. And the church that we were attending at the time, we began to work in that church doing the children's ministry. And I can remember one Sunday morning, I'm back there ushering at the back door, and I heard the pastor announce from the pulpit that our church was going to take its first mission trip. And there was a sign-up sheet in the foyer. And as soon as he said that, I felt something in my spirit saying, "You need to sign up for this trip." Now, this trip was $1,788, and we were a young couple. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but I really feel like I need to go on this trip. So as we finished up the usher, and I went and sat down beside Carol, and I said, "Hey, I really felt like the Lord wants me to go on this trip." And of course, her eyes got real big, and she's like, "Me too." And I'm like, "Well, that's not good, But I didn't think about the spiritual part of that. I thought, now I've got to raise $1,780 twice. So I started thinking how I could do that. And at the time, I had two little pickup trucks, and one was in better shape than the other one. I thought, well, I could sell that little truck, and that would be most of my trip money for us. And then maybe we could get a check back on income tax. We could. So put that together, and we would have enough money to go on this trip, because we really felt like that God wants to go. Now, the trip was to the Ukraine, and I thought the Ukraine was in Mississippi or somewhere, not too far from us, but come to find out, it's not in Mississippi. Some of you guys probably know where the Ukraine is. Found out later. But anyway, I really felt that we need to go. So I thought about it, and I thought, I got the money already figured out. And so the next week I'm praying, and I'm doing my devotion, and I hear the voice of God just as real as I'm talking to you. And I hear the voice, and it's, of course, at first I didn't know who it was. I heard this voice that says, "I want you to give that truck away." And the first thing I thought was, "Get behind me, Satan. You're trying to steal my mission money. What's going on?" But as I prayed, I said, "God," and I love the story of Gideon. So I said, "God, if this is you and this is what you want me to do, you really want me to give this truck to this young man in our youth group, then you give me another sign." And that's all I said. Well, that next Sunday morning, I walk into the foyer of the church, and this young man who had felt the call to be a pastor was going to go to Southeastern University in Florida. And he's very respectful. He always asks me, he says, "Hey, Mr. Ricky, how you doing? How's Miss Carol and the boys?" Every time. Well, this Sunday morning I walk in, there stands this young man, and I said, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" He said, "Mr. Ricky, what are you going to do with that little blue truck you got?" And I'm like, "What?" I couldn't even talk to the young man. I'm like, "Oh, man, I couldn't speak to him. The words wouldn't come out of my mouth. So I go in there and I sit down on the bench and I just start crying. I said, God, you know, I know you told me to do this, but forgive me for asking for the sign. So that afternoon, and this is a long story, I know, but I feel like you need to hear this part. So I go home and I signed the title to the truck and I washed the truck and I stop on the way to church and I fill it up with gas. And I get to church that afternoon and I called him outside and I said, he said, hey, I need to talk to you outside. I give him the keys. And I said, I really felt like God told me to give you this truck because the young man didn't know who his father was and his mother had cancer. And God had called him to go to school to be a pastor. And he had no way of going. And this young man starts bawling. And he said, Mr. Ricky, he said, I know that you're going to give me that truck. I said, you did? He said, yeah. He said, about 2 weeks ago, God told me he was going to give me that truck. He said, but this morning when I got up, he told me I had to ask you about it. All right. That's the truth. And I'm like, here's the key. And God told me, he said, if you'll give that truck away, I'll take care of your trip. And Monday morning, I go to work, and the guy that I worked for, I told him I wanted off for this trip, and he's like, no, you can't take off because we need you, and you don't need to be gone for 2 weeks. But that morning I walk in, he goes, how much do you like on your trip? And I said, all of it. I don't have any. I don't have a plan to get any money. And he says, well, if that fire truck outside sells, he said, I want to pay your way. Now, we had that truck for like 6 months. I'm like, didn't think about God being in nothing, none of that. But before that week was out, someone called, a fire department called and said, we need a truck just like this. And they started naming off the truck that we had. Truck sold, and long story short, he gave us the money. We went on this trip, and when we got to the Ukraine, now I'll be honest with you, I hadn't been too far outside the county line until then, and I was worried more about what I was going to eat. I'm a picky eater, and I carried more food in my suitcase than I had clothes. True story. And so we get over there, and I'm just worried to death, about the food they're going to serve us, and wind up staying with a lady and her daughter in an apartment building that had no electricity half the time, and we had to walk up like 14 flights of stairs, and it was just a hard thing. But leaving the Ukraine, I had an issue leaving. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand what was going on in my heart because it was like somebody was tearing part of my heart out, and I'm like, this is not right. I felt like I had a harder time leaving those people that I just met than I did leaving my kids going over there. And I didn't understand that. And, later on, I realized that was just God starting to call me and pull me towards missions. And so I get back home, and, everybody on the trip, a week or so later, I'm still laying in bed, crying and thinking about, where we were. And I'm like, what is wrong with me, man? Something is going on. And I don't understand it because, I'm not that way. I mean, why are we acting like this? I get around somebody on the team. I say, hey, what about that trip? And they're like, yeah, man, it was good, but I'm glad we're home. I'm like, man, that's not how I feel. So I don't know what's going on. Didn't know anything about missions. So then, after about a month or so, that feeling would die down, and I was okay, back in the routine, man, just working. And then a missionary would show up at our church, and he would eat my lunch. Everything he said, listen to these guys. I'm like, man, let's go, load the boat. It was just that pull that I felt like I need to be there instead of here. And again, not understanding that. So, I started signing up for every mission trip that came available. I did churches that I didn't even know. Heard they had an opening. I'm with you, I'm going. And might got in trouble doing some of that. But, so I signed up and I go to Ecuador with a church from another part of the state. And so we get to Ecuador, we fly in on a Friday night, and Saturday morning I'm walking around just praying, thanking God for letting me come and be a part of that trip. And I hear the same voice, and this time it's like, this is what I want you to do. This is what I have for you. And I'm like, what does that mean? Because sometimes God don't give us all the details. All I heard was, this is what I want you to do. And I'm like, okay, God, what is that? I don't know what this is what I want you to do means. You want me to? I was afraid to say that God was calling me into missions. If that makes sense. because once you put a calling, you got a label. And I was like, God, I'm not sure. I want to know for sure this is what you're calling me to do. So I'm just praying that week, God, show me what you want me to do, and just loving what I was doing there that week. And I start praying, God, if you're calling me into missions, then you got to call this young lady and them 2 kids. Carol back home, I said, you got to call my wife and my 2 boys, because I'm not going to drag them off to a foreign country kicking and screaming. It's got to be a family ordeal. So that whole week, man, I'm just praying, going, okay, God's talking to my wife. I know He is. He is. So when I call Carol, I'm not going to say anything about it. I want it to be God. So, the trip's over with. I show back up at the Atlanta airport, and in my mind, I see this picture. Carol's coming. She's running down there, and she's got her bag, and she's got the boys, and saying, "Stop the plane. We got to go back. God's calling us to missions." And were you at the airport?
But just not in that.
She didn't bring her bags. She came to the airport, but she didn't bring the bags. So, I'm thinking, okay, God, what are you doing? You got to be talking to my wife. So I go back home, and I asked Carol. I said, a couple of days later, and she hadn't said anything. I said, is God speaking to you about missions? And she says, what do you mean? I said, well, this is what I felt. This is what I felt like the Lord spoke to me. And I said, is God speaking to you about missions? She said some things that I'll never forget. It's kind of very spiritual. She said, you're crazy. And she gives us a list. She said, I would never live in a foreign country. Right?
Did.
She said, I can't leave my mother, being the only Christian. She said, I can't leave my mother. She said, there's some things no, there's no way. I said, well, look, whoa, all I want you to do is pray about it. She goes, oh, I'm going to pray. Don't you worry. That was it. So I left it at that. I'm like, oh, God, I missed it, So I'm thinking maybe what He said, this is what I want you to do, meant to support missions. So, we start supporting missions, and I'm still going on all these trips that I can. And I go talk to my pastor, and I said, hey, pastor, I have a heart for missions. So he made us the missions director of our church. And I thought, well, that's it. That's the medicine I need. I can take trips. I can connect people with missions, and talk to our missionaries. So that to go back, that was when I went to Ecuador, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then we went to Ecuador, and that's I was going to do a pre-trip. I'm going to go down there and kind of check things out, a vision trip. So I contacted the missionary we work with and asked him, could I come down and set up a trip? And he's like, yeah, sure, come on down. Well, during this 2-year process, as I'm praying for God to lead us into missions, or God figure this thing out, our son Caleb, who was at age 10, we were in children's church one morning, and I said, look, it was one of those times where you just felt God's spirit, felt God's presence. And I told the kids, I said, go find a place to pray and ask God what He wants you to do. Well, Caleb's always been, I want to be a doctor when I grow up and all this stuff. So he goes and he's praying. He comes back over, and at this time, he probably won't let me say it. He's a little chubby kid, and he comes over there, and a little chubby cheese, he got tears on his face, and he said, Dad, I'm mad. I said, why are you mad? He said, I told God I want to be a doctor, and He said, no, you're going to be a missionary. He said, I don't want to be a missionary. What is a missionary? I'm like, well, son, it's okay. I said, just go back and keep praying. So he goes back, and about 2 or 3 minutes, he comes back and goes, it's all right. He said, I could be both, So I'm like, all right. And then Joshua, you tell Joshua what happened to you and Joshua.
Well, actually, Joshua was called before Caleb.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, but it was all during this time. Joshua was 5 when God called him. It was longer than 2 years. It was more like 4 or 5 years during all of this. But anyway, Joshua, he was in class one day. He was in kindergarten, and they went to the Christian school, our church school, and he was in there, and it was nap time. So, and there was a little girl that had gotten hurt. She had fell and broke her arm the day before, and while she was at home, and she comes to school the next day. So while he's laying there, he's praying for her, and he said that he heard a voice saying Joshua, and he's looking around. He said the teacher wasn't sitting at the desk where he thought he heard the sound coming from. He goes, then he heard it again, and he said it was speaking to him. Said, yeah, it had to be God. So he said, and at that time, God said he wanted him to be a missionary. And that day, when we left school, I was a preschool teacher. And when we left school that day, we were driving home and everything was normal. And he's sitting in his car seat. He was still kind of small. So he was in the car seat and he goes, Mom. And I asked, what? And he's playing with his toy that he had in his hand. And he goes, today at nap time, God told me he wanted me to be a missionary. I said, what did you just say? And I just, it just scared me. And he said, yeah. And where's Ecuador? He had heard Ecuador, and I still had not answered the call. I was very scared because I really didn't want to leave the States. I kind of knew that God was dealing with me about missions, but I was very comfortable where we were at and didn't want to go. And so I kind of started explaining to him what it is, and then that was it. We didn't really talk about it that much. And then Ricky had the opportunity to go to Ecuador on a exploratory trip. Well, exploratory?
Yeah, it was a vision trip
Yeah.
to take a team down there.
Okay.
And so, while I'm getting ready to leave, my wife's like, "Okay, God, he's gonna come back all jacked up again, and crazy and fired up and ready to get back on a plane." And so, if this is your call for our family, like with our boys being called and Ricky feeling the call, if this is what you want us to do as a family, then you give me a dream. She said, "I never dream. So if you'll give me a dream and let me see it, then I know it's from you." So I go on this trip and I go deep in the jungle of Ecuador and we're having some services. It's incredible. We're flying into these villages and man, I'm like, this is awesome. This is what I was made for. you know. And so I come back and off the trip and while I'm gone, Miss Hendon has a dream, but she's not sharing any information. God's calling and she's still not answering the phone. So I'm saying it. But so I get back and back in the day, we're old school. I thank you guys for all that you can do, but we're old school. We had to go back home and download the pictures off the camera. You know, so I'm sitting there and I got the little SD card in there, and those images would pop up, and Carol standing behind me, just kind of watching over my shoulder, and an image pops up, and I hear Carol just, I'm like, what? Nothing. I'm like, okay. And then, another picture or two passes by, and then she just starts, crying. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? And, you guys have been married, like, nothing, leave me alone. And she runs off to the bedroom. I'm like, did I do? What was that? And so, being married a couple of years, I knew that the best thing I could do was just stay seated. You guys know what I'm talking about. So, later on, she shared with me that her dream, those same images, those pictures that I had taken, was in her dream, and that's how real God made it to her. So to confirm her call, and so she's like, okay, God, this is it. This is what you want us to do. She said, but three things has got to happen. She said, we can't go. She said, I looked on the website and it says that you can't go with debt. And we'd bought a house just a few years before that. And, we had car debt and whatever kind of debt. We were living the American dream. And as a young couple with two kids. So she goes, we have to be out of debt. And she says, my dad needs to be back in church with my mom so he can help my mom. And my brother needs to be saved. If you make those things happen, then I'll go. Within a month's time, all three of those things happened. All three of those things. Our home, we'd never put our home up for sale. I was talking to my neighbor at the mailbox, and I said, hey, maybe selling my house for too long. And he goes, okay, good, Well, he had been diagnosed with MS, a couple of months before, and he's like, I can't buy it or whatever. Well, this lady calls me one day on a Saturday. She calls me and she says, "I heard you're gonna sell your house." I'm like, I don't. Yeah, maybe. She goes, "Well, I'm coming to look at it." I'm like, um, "Well, we haven't had it appraised." She said, "No, I'm coming to look at your house tomorrow." I'm like, "Ma'am, I don't know you." And I said, "We need to have it appraised." She goes, "Well," I said, "We'll be at church tomorrow." And she said, "You're gonna be at church all day?" I said, "Well, no," but she said, "I'll be there at 2 o'clock." And she hangs up, and I'm going, "Who is this woman?" So, and I tell Kara what's going on, and so we said we need to come up with a price. We don't have a price for our house. So we sat down and we figured out all the debt we had, and okay, we have to have this much if we're going to do this. She shows up 2 o'clock. She walks up on our doorstep and walks through the door and begins to cry. 72-year-old lady. And I'm like, "Ma'am, are you okay? Was there an accident?" And she's like, "No." She said, "But I just feel the presence of God in you." I'm like, "That's good. We invited him in, a long time ago, and hopefully he hadn't left yet." Just joking around. She's not cracking a smile, and I'm thinking, okay. But she was a retired anesthesiologist from Destin, Florida. Her husband was bedridden. Now this house had, a basement and had stairs going up. And I'm thinking, I don't like stairs at my age. I'm sure you don't want stairs. And I'm trying to talk her out of this thing. And she's like, okay, she's walking around and we get to the door. She's walking out and she said, "Oh, what's the price?" I said, "Well, we hadn't had." She goes, "Yeah, but you got a price. What's the price?" And I said, "Well, if we sold it today, we'd have to have this." She goes, "Okay." And she leaves. I'm thinking that was the weirdest thing I ever had happen. 3 days later, she gives me a phone call and she says, "Hey, I need an address." I'm like, "For what?" She said, to send you a check. I said, for our ministry, we're getting ready to raise some money. She goes, "No, for your house." She said, "I'm buying your house." And I'm like, okay. So I give her the address. She said, "I need to share something with you." She said, "God called me to be a missionary when I was 12 years old." She said, "I didn't go." She said, "I grew up, went to school, got married, got a job, had a career." And she said, "There's not a day that's went by in the last 60 whatever years that I didn't think about what if." She said, "You can't do that." She said, "If God's called you, you got to go. And I'm taking this off your plate." So she bought our house. And now she, sent me a check and I carry it to the bank. I'm not even sure it's real. I don't know this person. I go to the bank. How do you take a personal check to the bank and go, "Hey, can you, I'm here to pay my house off." And they're like, "Sure you are." I mean, no, you're not here to pay your check. But, so God did that. And then during this time, I mean, within weeks of this happening, Carol's brother gets caught drinking and driving. Carol's brother was an alcoholic. This was his fifth DUI. He goes to jail. Luckily, he didn't get killed, but he goes to jail. And while he's in his jail cell, he has a vision of an angel walking into his cell, with a battered, tattered wing. And right there in that jail cell, he gives his life to Christ without a Bible, without a pastor, just because of this vision God showed him. He gives his heart to Christ. And while he's in jail, Carol's daddy's like, "Man, my son's in jail. Things are just falling apart." Things were so much better when we were going to church. Starts back to church the next Sunday. Whew. All three of those things happened. Those fleeces that she put out within a month's time. And, everybody's like, "Don't get discouraged. It's going to take you a while to raise your money. It may take you 2 years to get to the mission field." I mean, within 8 months, we were there. God had just done some crazy things. We had a girl in our youth group, or she was in our children's church, and she just got to the point where she came out of the children's church and was going into youth, but she was still our girl. These girls were just our pastor's daughter, and this girl was at our house all the time. They were our helpers in children's church. And 2 days before her 12th birthday, 13th. 2 days before her 13th birthday, she was in a car wreck and got killed, and just devastating our church. And so during this time we were raising money, we still needed about $20,000 to finish our cash budget. Her parents asked us to come over for dinner right before Christmas, right? Mm-hmm. And so we go over there and, we're talking, and they give us this plaque with her picture on it. just thanking us for being their pastor and loving on her and her getting saved in our ministry. And they give us an envelope. We didn't think anything about it. We get home and Carol opens the envelope. That's a check for $20,000. And that completed our cash budget. This little girl, I can remember when her dad didn't go to church, and she asked her mom one Sunday. She said, "Mom, why is Daddy not? Is Daddy going to heaven? Right? Is Daddy going to heaven?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "No, baby. If he don't get saved, he's not going to heaven. He's going to hell." So she goes home that day, and she's like 10 years old. She goes home and she said, "Dad," she goes, "today was my last day at church." And he says, "Why? I thought you loved church." And she said, "Oh, I do. But if you're not going to heaven, I'm not going either." And of course, the next Sunday he was there. He was there. But God has this incredible. I can remember when it was coming down to the wire, we were getting ready to go to the mission field. I heard God speak to me and said, "You're going to leave your church in a good time. It's going to be a good time. You're not going to want to leave." And when we were getting ready to go to the mission field, we were involved in everything. We cleaned the church. We were in part of ministry. But at the end, I felt like we were on the outside looking through the window because God was disconnecting us before he could reconnect us to the mission field. And I can remember on Sunday nights when it was awesome, the services were incredible. And I'm praying, "God, why now? It's good. I don't want to leave." And I'm thinking, I had a friend of mine who didn't come to church on Sunday night. I said, "Send Robert Hallman. He don't even come to church on Sunday nights. Send him to the mission field." But God had placed that desire in our heart to go. We wound up in Ecuador, worked 10 years with the Swore Indians in the jungle, and saw an incredible ministry, built over 50 churches there. Carol had started a girls' home, her and the other missionary. We had some girls that they started out with 2 girls, right? Mm-hmm. One girl was the youngest of 16 kids. Her mother says, "I'm done. I can't do it anymore," and brings her and drops her off with her backpack. Says, "This is it." The other girl had come from a village, and she was working in town as a maid and going to school. And she said, she came to Karen. She said, "What I do?" She said, "Last night," she said, "my owner came in." Didn't say my employee. She said, "My owner came in and said if I didn't have sex with him and his son, I no longer have a job or a place to live." And Karen said, "You get your stuff and come on." And that started the girls' home with those 2 girls. And I think now they run over 50 girls in the Hope House. So just incredible ministry there. When our last year in Ecuador, we felt God steering a change and didn't know what that looked like. We were thinking somewhere else in Ecuador. And so I got in my truck and I drove all the way up around the border of Ecuador and Colombia and all the way back down, praying and fasting, asking God, "God, where do you want us to go?" Never felt peace about where you want us to be. So, I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to do this with Carol. Maybe me and her need to do it together as a team. And she was in the States, so I left and went to the States. We came back to Ecuador in April that year, 2013, I think, 12, 13. And we went back down there for a meeting and they were talking about all the unreached people groups in Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to Chile. And they were talking about how many groups were in each country and how many units were working with those groups. And they went down the list, and we got to Ecuador. They're like, Ecuador has 15 UPGs and has 11 units working. And we're like, yeah. And he's reading these statistics. And he said, Peru, he says, wow, Peru has the most unreached people groups, had 84 unreached people groups. And he says, we have 1 missionary that's trying to reach those groups. And I'm like, God, that's not fair. That's not right, God. What's wrong? You need to send somebody down there to help that man. You know the rest of the story. And I'm like, I felt God say, yeah, we need to send somebody down. Are you ready to go? And I'm like, no, not me. We're not ready to go. You just need to send somebody younger than us. And, but God told us if you'd go, he'd build a team. And so I'm in this fleece mode. I'm like, God, if you want us to go to Peru, then you have our leadership ask us to go to Peru. I don't want to just ask, hey, y'all need somebody to go? We'll go. I want it to be God. And so that was in April. In July, we're in Springfield. Our area directors asked us to go out to dinner and wanted to give us something to talk about, pray about. And I told Carol, I said, tonight's the night. They're going to ask us to go to Peru. And she goes, you don't know that. You don't know. And I'm like, I feel it in my spirit. So that night we go to have a meal, and we're sitting there, and he says, have you guys ever considered Peru? I'm going. She's like, so I go to Peru. I said, I'd love to go down there and just kind of pray and see if God would confirm, our call there. So I called this missionary, and he's retiring this month. He's been there 30-something years in the jungle. And I called him, and I said, hey, I'd like to come down. When's the next time you're going out to the jungle? I'd like to come down, just kind of go out with you and just walk around, follow you around and see what you do. So he gives me some dates, and I clear my calendar and buy my tickets. And like a couple of days before the trip, his wife sends me an email, says, hey, Steve's in the hospital. He's got parasites. He's got intestinal infections, and, he can't make the trip, so you need to cancel. I'm like, I'm not canceling. And she's like, no, you need to cancel. You know anything about Peru? You've never been here before. I'm like, I know, but, I speak a little Spanish. I think I'll be okay. So I show up, against her better judgment. She's from New York, I think. Anyway, she said, no, I don't think you need to come back. I went anyway. And so I followed the same agenda that he had sent me, and just going to see what it was like. And I wound up going into Yurimaguas, didn't know anybody there, bought a ticket to go upriver in the boat like we did, Paul and I did, and wound up in Uspallata, where we stayed one night out there. And I get to Uspallata, and the pastor, Rodrigo, he's there, and he's like, man, we're so glad you're here. I'm like, yeah, I'm just kind of come to see what's going on. He goes, no, God sent you here. I'm like, well, I don't know about that. I said, but it's good to be here. And he goes, no, I'm telling you, God sent you here. He said, Steve's in the hospital. I said, yeah, I know. We've been praying for him. And he says, no, you don't understand, son. He said, there's 45 people here that we couldn't communicate with and tell them that Steve was going to be here, that they're already here. They're here waiting on you to teach them for the next 3 days. And I'm like, I know that's not true. God wouldn't do that to me. I know God. Me and him are friends, and he wouldn't do that to me. So, and I said, man, I don't have anything. I said, I didn't bring any material. I said, I wasn't thinking, that I was going to do that. I said, the only thing I brought was my Bible. And Rodrigo said, must be what they need. I see you in the morning. And so, he leaves me this little hostel. And I'm telling you guys, I couldn't sleep all night. I'm fussing with God. I'm arguing with him. I'm crying. I'm thinking, okay, there's a story in the Bible about, Peter being let down the boat. I said, I need to go down there and get one of those canoes and untie that thing and float out of here. It's as far as I can go. And I can remember it's getting daylight, and I'm scared to death. I'm like, this ain't happening. God, I can't believe you do this to me. He's supposed to be here to pick me up. And so I said, okay, God, this is it. This is the deal. I'm going to get up there, and I'm going to stand up there, and I'm going to open my mouth. And if you don't put something in it, we both going to look like fools. That's just the way it's going to be. That's exactly what I said. I get in there, and I can't even tell you it was the most incredible 3 days spiritually for me that it was all God. And God confirmed a lot of things on that trip. One night we were back at the pastor's house, and we were having coffee. It was like midnight, and we're sitting there, and he's looking at me and goes, oh, yeah. I'm going, what? He said, God just reminded me of a vision he gave me years ago. He said, I saw this couple, and they were foreigners, and they were walking into our village, and he had a Bible on his arm. And he said, I never could see their face clearly. He said it was just kind of like they were in a cloud. He said, but tonight God opened and just kind of revealed, moved that cloud. He said, tonight I can see the face. He said, you're that man. I'm like, I leave there. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, Carol, you better pack your bags. We're going to Peru. And so we came back to Peru. We finished up our itineration, showed up in 2015. We drove from Lima to Yurimaguas, which is like 36 hours. First time Carol had ever been in Peru, and we get to Yurimaguas, and it's not a very clean town. At that time, it was worse. Mm-hmm. It's a port town, and so you get a lot of traffic from the river. And so we pull up, and we check in this hotel, and the guy behind the desk says, listen, don't leave the hotel. He said, there's some strikes going on. He said, if you leave, they'll cut your tires, they'll destroy your car. I'm like, okay, how long was that like? Oh, a couple days to be over there. 6 weeks later, we're in this hotel room, a 10 by 10 with all our luggage for 6 weeks. New country. We don't know a soul there. Uh, First time as empty nesters. And my wife is, she's questioning our calling. She's questioning did you really hear from God? I think I did. 6 weeks. But we find out, we get out and we start, finally get out and start steering around and find, what's going on with the local churches. We had 9 churches in our whole region at the time. We were a sub-region of Iquitos, which meant we didn't have enough churches to be a region. And with 9 small churches, we began with those churches and felt like we needed to preach and share about church planting and missions. Just start right there. And that was in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
When we had our first mission convention. We had over 400 people show up. We invited all the Peruvian missionaries that were itinerating at that time, and we picked them up. We had no support, no infrastructure for doing that, but on faith we picked those missionaries up. And when we left in 2015, we had enough churches. We had over 40 churches in 4 years. 2019. We had over 40 churches, and we're able to become our own region. Last year, we were number 2. Our region, now a small region in the jungle, was number 2 in missions given in the whole nation of Peru. That's God. These guys caught the vision, and they're doing it. They're doing church planting. They're doing missions. I mean, they're supporting those missionaries and more missionaries since then. We have the camp. You guys know about the camp. You guys have helped us with the camp. I guess I can talk about that a little bit later, but whenever you want me to do that. But that's our testimony. That's how God has called us to the mission field. And our son Caleb, like she said, when he was 10, or like I said, when he was 10, God called him to be a missionary. And Carol asked him to send it to her because she wanted to make sure she got it right. But how Caleb was called, you share that? Can I share that?
This one, if you can, maybe the shorter, the condensed version.
But I don't have a short version. But
there's some crazy awesome parts to this one. Just the highlights of this one are just amazing.
I'll let Carol share that.
Cool. Condensed.
Well, he wrote about a book here, but just give them just tell them what you know.
Okay. Let me see.
The fleeces that they put out, and then how God fulfilled, even if you just focused on the fleeces they put out. Like, nobody's just gonna. Very few people, when they're called mission fields, will say, "Oh yeah, we're." So they put these fleeces out just like Ricky and Carol did, and their set were amazing. It included this incredible encounter at the church service. That if you only didn't tell anything else, the church service.
Our kids grew up on the mission field. We took our boys there when they were 7 and 11. That's their ages when we got to the mission field. And leaving the mission field, Caleb felt like he was done. That's mom and dad's call. They took me there. Everything was great, but I want to go back to the States, and I want to get a great job and have a big house and a beautiful wife and a white picket fence and a dog. That's what he wanted to do, and so that's what he did. And so you start from there.
Yeah. He had a really good job. But one Sunday they were in church and he was praying and he said he was really getting serious, with God. And he was just praying, God, just let me be your hands and feet. And he said that they were the worship leader. They were singing one song, and then all of a sudden he just cuts and he starts singing, Lord, I want to be your hands and feet, the lyrics to this. And then he stopped and he said, I really don't know why I did that. That must have been for somebody here today. So when that happened, Caleb began to pray and he said, well, God, if that is what you want me to do, he said, you'll either have the speaker to
the guest speaker.
Yeah, the guest speaker to call me out and say, hey, I want you to go back to missions. Or at the end of the service, you'll have the pastor just to come and talk to me and pray with me. You know, it doesn't have to be about any specific thing, but if he'll just come and pray with me, I'll know that you are calling me back into missions or recalling me. So they go through the service, get finished, and Brittany's kind of just chatting, and he's looking at Brittany, and he's going, "We need to go. We need to go." Because, you know, at this time, he thought he was in the clear because the guest speaker didn't call his name out. He didn't say, "I want you to go to missions" or anything. But then he notices out of the corner of his eye that the pastor is coming his way. And he's like, "Oh, let me get my stuff." So he's trying to get his stuff and go out the door. And about the time, the pastor puts his hand on his shoulder and he said, "Hey, Caleb, how are you?" He goes, "Oh, I'm good. Everything's good." He goes, "Well, God wants me to pray with you. So I just want to pray with you right now." And he just, it's like, oh God. He knew, and he was like, "Thank you for coming and praying with me," because he didn't think that would happen, because, you know, when you have a guest pastor there, guest speaker there, the pastor's busy and he has to tend to them. But anyway, he obeyed God and went and spoke to Caleb. And then on the way home, Brittany, she just kind of starts laughing, and he goes, "What are you laughing at?" She goes, "Well, I've been praying for weeks that God would recall you into missions." And she said, "And I know that's what happened today."
Because, well, she had been called her junior year?
Yeah, she was called between her junior and senior year of high school. She went on a trip to El Salvador, and God told her that he was calling her to missions. But on their way home, he did. They talked. She started laughing, and then he didn't say anything. He gets home and he runs to the restroom and he calls his dad. He said, he's talking to him, and Ricky goes,
No, he said, "Dad, you're not gonna believe what
"Dad,
happened."
you're not going to believe what happened." And Ricky goes, "Well, if you're going to tell me that God's calling you to mission," he said, "I already know this." He said, "Because someone from a church in Alabama had called Ricky and said, 'Hey, I had a vision, and your son and daughter-in-law are there with 2 kids.'" And he goes, "Well, that's not true. We don't even have kids right now." But they, long story short, they started the process to become missionaries, and by the time they hit Peru, they had 2 children. So they did
10.5 months apart.
Yeah, and they're 10.5 months apart. So they have 2 little girls.
But there was also a step in there where they had one. They just had the one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just had the one. And they're in a church service. And
Oh, yeah.
the large church service, and the
Oh,
dog
yeah.
upstairs. And the mother, Brittany's mother, was sitting upstairs, and whoever was on the platform said what?
Said that you're going to have a baby, or you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's like, "No, I'm not. I just had a baby."
Yeah.
Just had a
She's like,
baby.
"No,
So
I'm
they
not."
were sitting there like they had no idea themselves. And,
Right.
and Brittany said her mother was up in the balcony. She saw her.
What?
You better not be talking to my
Trying to
daughter.
see who it is.
and they thought it was, not credible. And it turned out she was pregnant because she just had the baby.
Yeah.
Yes.
Caleb was in college, and he calls me and he goes, "Hey, Dad, I want to come down and help you for the summer." I'm like, "Son, you need to work to pay off some of the debt you've created, for the summer." He goes, "Well," and he pulls a God card. He goes, "I really feel like God wants me to come down, and work." I'm like, "Ugh. All right, come on down." And that him and Brittany came down with a team to help us with VBS from another church in the States, and that's how they met. And I had no idea that was going on, but somehow they got paired up to be the team leaders for the 12-year-olds. But funny story, probably shouldn't say it, but when Brittany gets out of the van, our boys has always been very competitive, 2 years apart. So Brittany gets out of the van. 4 years apart. But Brittany's getting out of the van, and our youngest son, Joshua, goes, "I called dibs on that one," which was Brittany. And then Caleb winds up marrying Brittany. So it's kind of awkward, sometimes for Christmas and Thanksgiving. But they all get along really good.